Okay, I'm going to get us started here. It's 12:59. I'm a minute or so early. I'm sure we'll have some other people coming on. A couple things before we get going. We do record all these webinars. We do email out the recording for everybody that registers. So if you register, you'll get the recording on email whether you attend or not. But really the easier way is we put them on YouTube. So just go to the YouTube channel at Crowe Medicare on YouTube, or you can Google YouTube Crowe and Associates, and all our recordings are up there. And it's probably the easiest place to watch them. We put them up the same day after we do them, so that way you don't have to rely on getting the email from us to watch them. Also, if you have any questions, just send them into the question section. I will answer them at the end. I do sometimes try to answer them as I'm doing the webinar, but that doesn't go well when I try to do that because I can't do both at once. And I think that's it. So let's get started. So today we're going to go over non-resident agent and entity licensing. Start off with the basic Medicare rules for having an entity. Just a couple things that I see people ask about or don't always do right. Just basic understanding of how that works with commissions when you're having an entity being paid. We'll go over licensing, certs, and payments. Talk about the principal being connected to that entity and the certs requirement for that. I'll go over subagents and state licenses. Then we'll hit a little bit on NIPR.com. That's National Insurance Producers Registry. That's the place you'll go to get to apply for all your non-resident licenses for yourself for an agency. And then we'll talk about the entity name issue, which we'll get into with specifically right now with the state insurance departments for Florida and New York, but I think down the road with CMS. And that's the whole Medicare in the name issue that we'll talk about. Okay, so a couple of reminders before we get started here. As I just said, I spoke over my slide a little bit. All our webinars are recorded. We put them on the YouTube channel at Crowe Medicare. We have like 150 recorded webinars on there, sorted by date and topic, so you can go on there and watch them if you want. Just wanted to mention the Pinnacle website. So that's really useful for all of us prior to AEP. The reason being is they put all the benefits at a glance for the different companies up there that you can access. So, for example, I know Devoted's up there already, which is really early, but they already have that up, and it's on the Pinnacle site. And they also put all the links to the various company certifications on there as well, which is really handy. I know I do, I think close to 30 certs, and I never know what the websites are for all the different companies. I can't remember. So I just go on the Pinnacle site, and it shows me and gives me all the rules and the link and everything, which is nice. So to access that information, you'd go to pfsinsurance.com. As soon as you go on there on the home page, you'll see the AEP toolkit. It's kind of halfway down the page, and you'll see it. And then you click on that AEP toolkit, and then you'll see everything. All the benefits at a glance, links to the certifications. As new benefits at a glance become available, they'll be put up there. Like I said, Devoted's already up there. Down to the left-hand side a little bit, you'll see the link for the AHIP discounted rate. So you can, the carriers, once they have their certifications available, you'll be able to take AHIP through them at the discounted rate. But Pinnacle has it up there already. So when AHIP comes out on June 21st, if you want to take it at the discounted rate of $125 versus the standard $175, you can do it right through there. And that's about 3/4 of the way down the page on the left once you go on the AEP toolkit. And then the other topic I just wanted to mention briefly is we send out, as many of you know, we send out emails constantly for our Zoom meetings like we did yesterday, the agency Zoom meeting. And for these webinars. And a lot of people, they go to spam, they don't see them, or maybe they're just not caught up with their email. So we are going to make a page, we've already made it in fact, that has our Zoom registration links, our webinar registration links, a variety of things. The AHIP link, our E&O, which is $426 a year. Like, we're going to put all applicable things on that one page. So the page won't change. You can always just check the page. We're going to update it every Tuesday and Friday with the link for the next upcoming webinar or Zoom meeting. We will email that page out to you, to everybody that's registered for this meeting today. And then if you can just save it to your favorites, then that way you can just check the page for the link instead of needing to get an email from us. Okay, enough of the house cleaning stuff. So just talk about the initial setup basics for contracting for Medicare. So as an agent, obviously you can have commissions paid to yourself or your account, right? So if you're set up as an individual agent, you can have commissions paying to your bank account under your tax ID. However, some companies, in fact most, you can be set up as an agent and you could have another bank account for an entity, and you could, when you do your contracting as an individual, you could set it up that way initially, or the carrier won't really know. You could put the entity bank account in there and they will pay that entity's bank account. The catch being, though, if you do it that way, when they report it, it's going to be under your tax ID as an individual. So it kind of defeats the purpose, but people have asked me before, hey, if I have an entity and I want that entity to be paid, can I use the bank account? Yes, you can, and they'll deposit the money in there. They won't know the difference. But when tax time comes, that 1099 is going to have your individual tax ID on it. So, and then the other thing as an individual, a lot of people ask me is, as an individual, can I be a GA, and SGA? Can I have an agency level contract? Yes, with most carriers you can. Not all, but with most you can. I think the prevailing thought is, if I want to have an agency contract level, I have to have an entity, and you don't. There are a couple carriers, hopefully I don't get them wrong off the top of my head, Cigna and WellCare have gone that way where they do require you to have an entity, a licensed entity, to be a higher level, but most of the carriers do not. So I just wanted to mention that part first. Now, but what if you want to have an entity and you want it to get paid? Well, that's where everything comes in then. So if you got an entity and when you write business, you want that carrier to pay the entity and you want it to be official, so that 1099 from the carrier has your entity's tax ID, that's where, if you create an entity, that's where it needs to be licensed and certified in every state that you're selling in or that a sub-agent is selling in. And so when you create your entity, you create it, you will get a license for that entity, so you have a license for yourself, but the entity needs an insurance license as well. And then you need a principal attached to that entity, so that could be you. So you set up the entity, you get it licensed, and then you're attached as the principal. And what the carrier is going to look to see is the principal licensed and certified that's attached to that entity. So you don't do a separate certification for the entity. Your certification counts if you're attached as the principal. Where trouble comes with this once in a while is we'll get an organization that'll say they want to get contracted for Medicare, and the entity itself will be licensed. We'll get them contracted, but then let's say the owner who hasn't written business in 30 years wants to be the principal of that entity, but that owner who's licensed maybe, or maybe they aren't, they don't want to do certifications. Well, then that entity's not going to get paid, because if they're attached as the principal, they've got to be licensed and certified for every company that entity gets paid with. Hopefully that's clear. If it doesn't make sense, just shoot questions in and I will answer them at the end. But we deal with that often, comes up a lot, and I just wanted to clarify that piece of it. Okay, so as I mentioned, the principal and entity must be licensed in every state for commissions. What this will do, what you got to keep in mind is, yes, legally there are some advantage to having an entity get paid, but this will double your fees up. So your licensing fee, for example, you got to keep in mind, as you know, when you get an insurance license, it costs money. When you get a non-resident license, it costs more money. Each state has their own cost for getting licensed. If you have a licensed entity that's going to get paid, you're going to get doubled up, because you're going to pay the licensing fee for that entity in every state as well. So you just gotta remember and be aware of that. Then you have the issue of the appointment fee. So you have the licensing fee for yourself and the entity, but then if you're getting licensed in non-resident states, there are some carriers that will not pay what's called the appointment fee. Because every time a carrier licenses you in a non-resident state or resident state, they are charged, as the insurance company, they are charged a fee to appoint you. Some of those companies will pay all those fees on your behalf in your resident state and your non-resident states. Some companies, however, will not. They'll pay your appointment in your resident state, but for every non-resident state you're in, they will pass that appointment fee on to you. And it can add up. Some states, it's different in every state, but if you're somebody who goes and gets non-resident licenses in 30 states, and you're with a carrier, let's say like United, who doesn't pay your non-resident appointment fees, it can add up to a substantial amount of money. And if you're both yourself and your entity are licensed and appointed, then you've got double appointment fees. We get a lot of times where somebody has set up and they have, as an agency, maybe a GA-SGA or GA-MGA-SGA, and they're bringing on sub-agents. Something you got to be aware of. If you bring on a sub-agent, and let's say that sub-agent wants to write, they've got multiple carrier appointments through you, and they want to write in Montana. They've decided they got a case they're going to write, and they say, well, I went and got licensed in Montana. I want to sell there. Is their upline? You and your entity have to be appointed, have to be licensed and appointed in Montana for them to be able to sell there. Happens a lot. We get people who come from telesales, for example, and when you work for a telesales agency, they pay all your licensing fees and appointment fees, and so maybe they're licensed in 40 states. Well, if you're going to bring that person on and they want to sell in 40 states, you're going to have to be licensed and appointed in 40 states. Okay, so again, you have questions, just send them right in. I'll answer them here at the end. So the next we'll hit certifications. So let's say you're in 30 states. People often will think they've got to do separate in there. They've got a contract with Aetna. They'll often think, well, I got to do a separate certification in every state. You usually don't. With most carriers, once you do your cert, you're certified then for all the states you're going to sell in. You just need to have a license and be appointed in that state. And only the principal of the entity takes the certs. I mean, the entity isn't a person. It can't take certs. So if the appointed principal is certified, your entity is good to go then. It's important to know the National Insurance Producers Registry. That's NIPR.com. That is the place you go to appoint for a non-resident license for yourself, for your organization, your LLC, your S-Corp, your corporation. It's all on NIPR. The process is pretty easy. You can get as many non-resident appointments, non-resident licenses as you want, non-resident state licenses as you want for yourself, for your company, your entity that you set up. Each state simply wants your money. So you go on NIPR, apply for the non-resident licenses. You took your insurance exam. You don't have to take another one, obviously. As long as you're licensed in your resident appointment, they'll give them to you. Just each state has a different amount they will charge to get those licenses. And again, the cost for your license is separate from the carrier appointment fee that some of them will pay for you, but others will pass on to you to pay. So two separate costs. So in this world of I'm an agent, I'm having my agency is a licensed entity that's getting paid, you're in some cases going to pay 4 fees. The licensing fee for both of you, the carrier non-resident appointment fee for that given state. And then if you have 50 states, now that can add up to a substantial amount of money. Once you get licensed for a new state, if you want to write in that state, all you have to do is just send the license to us and let us know what carriers are to be added in those states. That's all you got to do. You can call our office with that information. We are just finishing our platform you can use where you can, from a website, you can get appointed. It's a page we have. You can get appointed on that page, or you can add additional states and carriers in those states through there as well. So that's a new feature. We will be pushing that out a little more and fairly soon. So it allows new agents to get contracted. Existing agents can request new states, new carriers, and also there is in fact a ordering supplies fulfillment button in there, so you can order supplies through there. The reason for the delay here is my slides are taking forever to change. Not really sure why. I apologize for that. Okay, so enough of that. Let's talk about CMS and business names. So CMS is definitely starting to crack down on the names, and what I mean is the legal names of an entity you create. So when you file for an entity in another state, you have to have a name that goes along with it. They are starting to crack down CMS themselves about what that name is. On top of that, the insurance departments are starting to get on board with this. So what this has created is CMS has a set of rules, but then insurance departments are creating their own, or they're enforcing the rules more harshly. So the question people have a lot lately is, am I still allowed to have the word Medicare in my company name? Well, CMS is saying that it can still be used, just not in a misleading manner. However, they've been preempted by a couple states' insurance departments, namely Florida and New York. Florida is just point blank saying you cannot have Medicare in the name of your new entity. So if you try to create one in Florida, they're not going to allow the word Medicare in the name of it. And New York is getting there. So people will say, well, what's allowed for a name? Well, with Florida, Medicare isn't. In New York soon, Medicare won't be allowed. CMS is still allowing it, but I think CMS is going to follow suit very soon. So I think soon we'll be in an environment where we can't have Medicare as a business name at all. Not there yet, but it's going that direction. So what else is allowed for a name? So it's a really good question. Finding the answer is kind of hard. So in Florida, for example, they'll say, oh, this business name isn't accepted. And you might think to yourself, well, what are the criteria? Like, how do I, what are my rules? They're kind of hard to find. So for Florida, for example, I'll let you know, in Florida, you can apply for a name. They've got a checker, a sunbiz.org, which you can go and check and make sure nobody has that name yet. And it'll say, yep, this name's good to go. But then the Florida Insurance Department, when you actually file it, will say, no, we don't like this name. The way you can check the rules is do a Google search of 607.0401 corporate name. Literally Google that. 607.0401 corporate name. So go in Google and put that in there. And guidance on the name for Florida will be the first result that comes up. So if you Google search that, it will come up. I was going to put the link in, but it's so long, it'd be impossible for you to write it down in time. So just Google those numbers and 2 words, and you'll get their guidance on what is allowed for a name and what isn't. It's pretty interesting, in fact. Okay, so New York has their name, consent, and approval department. So same thing. Go into Google and Google name, consent, and approval department New York. It'll be the first result that comes up, and they will give you some parameters of what they allow for a business name. Or another source for it is Google restricted name phrases New York. The first result will be a site as well, both New York State sites. People always say, well, I used a third party. That gets a little iffy. I usually use the state insurance department sites. So if you do that, though, it'll give you a little better idea of when you're filing a name. We've had a lot of people get frustrated with trying to get business names approved, and they just keep saying, nope, that's not good, or this one's not good. This will help you understand why, so you can do a little research ahead of time. So just getting off track a tiny bit, but in the same, I think, spirit of what we're talking about, what about business cards for Medicare purposes? So as Medicare producers, what can we do? What can we put on a business card for a title? So I didn't know how to spell that. I had to spell check it. From the CMS final rule, that's the final rule for 2024. And I put it in red because it's very restrictive. So red to me is like a alert restrictive color. Right out of there, it says agents are prohibited from using a title that has the potential to mislead or misrepresent their role as an insurance agent, such as a title that suggests you are affiliated with or approved, endorsed, or authorized by Medicare. Agent titles that imply you have additional knowledge, skill, or certification above licensing requirements that cannot be verified is prohibited. So some examples of those prohibited titles on your business card. Certainly can't call yourself a Medicare specialist. I mean, you may be, but you can't say you are one. Medicare sales agent is not allowed. Senior advisor and United Health advisor are examples of titles on business cards that are not allowed. And I should have some elevator music as we wait for the next slide. There we go. Okay, so just to give you an idea there on the cards, just to give you an idea of what you can't put on there. Okay, so the CMS final rule, a lot of times people ask me about websites. So this one's interesting. Right now, the final rule for 2024 does not specify that you cannot have the word Medicare in the URL. And if you look around, I gave an example, but there's plenty of companies that do have Medicare for their website name in their URL of their website. It does say you cannot use the word or symbols in a way that would indicate approval, endorsement, or authorization of Medicare or any government agency. So that's what they're saying. Now, what's interesting is you have the Medicare helpline, which is that's not CMS, that's a broker, and you have MedicareCoverageHelpline.com. Those are sites that have been around a long time. They are still up. They do high volume. They have not taken them down yet. That definitely, to me, would seem like a misleading name. I think, right now people are just kind of going along as long as they're allowed to, but down the road, something like that won't be approved. The state of Florida does not allow the word Medicare in new sites, so they won't allow it. So if you have a website that has Medicare in it, sooner or later, if you're licensed is a resident or non-resident in Florida, it's just a matter of time. Sooner or later, Florida is going to address that with you, force your hand to change that URL, and it's simply just a matter of time before CMS says you can't have Medicare in URL names. They haven't done it yet, but they certainly, if I had to guess, they're going to. So we have a lot of our advice we were given from some different areas was don't bother making a website with Medicare name anymore, because sooner or later, if you have one, then leave it for now until you're forced to change it. But for new ones, don't put it in the name because you're going to be forced to change it sooner rather than later. All right, again, I'm going to go look and see if we have questions in a few minutes. I'm about done here. Some other quick things. We have clarification on the 48-hour scope of appointment. For those who didn't see it, I think most of you probably did, but CMS in the 2024 final rule said they're going back to the 48-hour scope. They said there would be no exceptions to it. However, now there are 3. So the 3 exceptions to the 48-hour scope rule, which is going to be new, it's going to kick in for AEP. The 3 exceptions will be at the end of an enrollment period. A lot of organizations have asked for further clarification on that. Does that mean the last day, the last week, the last month of the enrollment period? No clarification has been provided, so we have to determine what that means. So 48-hour scope isn't needed at the end of an enrollment period. It is not needed for a walk-in appointment, meaning the person walks in unannounced for an appointment. You don't need a 48-hour scope. You can get a same-time scope. And then there's a lot of debate over an inbound call. So if you have an inbound call to you, the person wants to enroll over the phone, is that the same as a walk-in? And clarification has been provided by CMS on that, and they've confirmed indeed it is. So if you have an inbound call, whether it's from a lead company or somebody calls your office, that is an exception, and you can do a same-time scope. And that is it. I said it was a short one. It was pretty short. Let's see if we have any questions. All right. So, okay, somebody said, so basically just go to NIPR and apply for a license for your entity name and EIN tax number. Then they will ask you for the principal info. Okay, so, right, so you have to have the entity first. So what you would do is, because we're talking about an entity versus NIPR getting a license for it. So make up a random name here, not the name of the person that asked the question, but George, let's say, wants to get licensed in South Carolina, wants to have, get set up in South Carolina. If George already has an entity, then all he does is apply on NIPR for a non-resident license for that entity in South Carolina. Let's say George, let's keep it simpler though. George is in Connecticut. He's just getting paid himself. He wants to create an entity. Well, you file for an entity, get it created, and once it's created, you have a tax ID for it. Then you go on NIPR and apply for a license for that entity. So hopefully that clarified for you on that question. And the principal info, no, NIPR isn't going to ask for that. That's when you contract. So when you get a license for that entity and send in to get it contracted. You call us and say, hey, I got this new entity, I want to get it contracted, it's licensed. Then we are going to attach you when we do the contracting. You'll be attached as the principal to that entity contract. Okay, somebody said, let's see, I'll read this. Real stupid question. Well, no such thing as stupid questions, for sure, so we'll just say a question. From an agent new to Medicare, with so much focus on A&P and OEP, given that there are thousands turning 65 every day, isn't every day an enrollment opportunity versus just the few time frames mentioned above? Yes, absolutely. T65 business, people coming off group plans, the majority of the agents, I would say, with us, and we have a lot of them, and this is including myself back in the day, write probably more business outside of AEP and OEP than they do in it. So yeah, we kind of take that for granted, but yeah, huge opportunity to rate people turning 65, people coming off work coverage all year long, people who had a change in drug help status. This is definitely a 12-month of the year business. And sometimes, for most of us, we write more business outside of AEP than we do in it. Okay, next question. Let's see. Ed, is it accurate to say that the 48-hour rule pertains specifically to the plan detail and enrollment type call versus the initial contact introduction call? Well, I would say maybe I'm misinterpreting your statement. I would say really it's situation specific, though. It's not really pertaining as much to the detail of the plan. I mean, if you're going to pitch somebody on a plan, okay, I think I'm understanding your question. If you're going to pitch somebody on a plan, then you need a scope. So if you're going to talk about Medicare Advantage benefits or plans, Part D benefits or plans, you need a scope in order to do so. Hopefully that answered your question. Follow-up question then, what makes AEP and OEP such a big deal if we can enroll people 365 24/7? Well, what makes it a big deal is you're certainly enrolling those people outside of those time frames, but during AEP and OEP, that's when you can change existing people. So for some agents, there's a couple scenarios there. Maybe you have a massive book of business. Well, AEP and OEP is important for you because you got to retain those people, which might include plan changes. Maybe you have a plan that was great and now it looks terrible going into AEP. You got a lot of people you got to switch. So it has a lot of relevance to you. For other agents, whether they have a big book or not, maybe they're going to market really hard and try to switch a lot of people to a better plan, a different plan that they don't currently have in their book of business. They were written direct by the carrier or by another agent. So AEP and OEP does represent an opportunity to do bulk plan changes, retain your book, or to get a lot of new clients in a short time frame. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, it looks like that's all we have for questions. I think. Yep, it looks like we're done with questions. Okay, just remember, we will email you out our web page that will have all our events on it. So it's going to have events. Take a good look at it. It's going to have, we'll update it every week with the new webinar invite, the topic, the registration link, our Zoom meeting registration links. That way you don't have to worry about this stuff getting lost in email. And then anything else important we'll throw up there too. We'll shoot it out in the email to everybody that registered. Oh, I got one more. Well, that's so the last question, I would say that's one we'd take offline. I really wouldn't address that on a webinar. So feel free to give us a call or shoot me an email. Other than that, appreciate you coming on today. Thank you. And hope everybody has a great day, and hope to see you again on a future webinar. Thanks. Bye.